Here's what most people looking at Texas real estate right now are getting completely wrong. They're watching the headlines, prices cooling in Austin, inventory stacking up in Dallas, sellers cutting prices across the board, and they're assuming the whole market is softening. Some of it is, but not all of it. While the big metros have been correcting, a completely different story has been playing out in cities most buyers aren't even looking at yet. Prices rising, inventory tightening, homes moving faster than they were a year ago. Today, we're breaking down 10 Texas cities where that's actually happening. And more importantly, where you can still get in before the window closes. Because in some of these markets, that window is already smaller than most people realize. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what actually happened to the Texas housing market over the last year. The 4 largest metros in the state, Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, all saw home prices decline in 2025. Inventory piled up. Sellers started cutting. The correction people had been predicting for years finally showed up. But here's what the headlines missed. Texas didn't cool evenly. It never does. The same migration pressure that pushed Austin past affordability is now spilling into smaller markets. And that shift is exactly where the opportunity is. Remote work gave buyers options they didn't have before. And certain cities, the ones with the right combination of job growth, location, and limited inventory, started absorbing that demand quietly. Those are the cities we're covering today. Not the ones making headlines, the ones where the math still works. And where buyers who move early are going to look back and wonder why more people weren't paying attention. Starting at number 10, Killeen. If your budget is under $200,000, this is one of the last real entry points left in Texas right now. The typical home here sits well under that number, and in a state where prices have been climbing for years, that's not something you find in many places anymore. The demand here isn't speculative, it's structural. Fort Cavazos, one of the largest military installations in the country, anchors the local economy and creates a constant baseline of buyers and renters cycling through the market. That doesn't generate explosive appreciation, but it creates something most markets can't offer right now. Predictability. On paper, this looks straightforward, but there's a trade-off worth understanding. Killeen's economy outside the military is limited. Job diversity is thin. And if you're relocating for work in a specific industry, or you need the infrastructure that comes with a larger city, you're going to feel that gap. This isn't a city for every buyer, but for remote workers, military families, or first-time buyers who need to get into the market without overstretching. Killeen is one of the few places in Texas where under $200,000 still gets you into a real home. That kind of entry point is becoming rare. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back. Now, this is where the opportunity starts to show, because Tyler has something Killeen doesn't, a growth story that most buyers haven't found yet. Tyler sits in East Texas, about 90 miles east of Dallas. And for most people looking at Texas relocation, it doesn't even register. That's exactly why it's worth paying attention to right now. Home prices in Tyler have been trending upward, driven by healthcare sector expansion, a workforce anchored by UT Tyler, and something that's been happening quietly across East Texas. Buyers priced out of Dallas who are willing to trade commute time for cost savings. The typical home here is still in the low to mid $200,000 range. And the market has been tightening. Homes are moving faster than they were 2 years ago. And this is happening fast. The part that doesn't get talked about enough, remote work completely changed the math on distance. You don't need to be close to Dallas if you're not commuting there anymore. The honest trade-off. Tyler's job market is concentrated. Healthcare and education dominate. If you're relocating for employment outside those sectors, your options here are narrow. But for remote workers, retirees, or families looking for a mid-sized city with genuine character and a cost of living that actually makes sense, Tyler is one of the better undervalued buys in Texas right now. Most buyers still aren't looking here. That won't last forever. Now, this next one is stronger, and the reason why might surprise you. Waco is one of the more unusual stories on this list because the demand here was partly created by a television show, and then it became real. The Magnolia effect is not a myth. When Chip and Joanna Gaines turned Waco into a destination, something unexpected happened. Tourists arrived first, then investors, then actual residents started running the numbers and realizing the location made sense. Independent of any trend, Baylor University is the permanent institutional anchor, enrollment, employment, and the economic activity that follows both. And Waco's position dead center between Dallas and Austin on I-35 gives it geographic logic that doesn't depend on anyone's taste in home renovation television. Home prices here are still below the state median, and appreciation has been steady rather than volatile. Now, this is the part nobody is paying attention to. Steady appreciation in a market that got early attention is actually the better signal. It means the demand is real and it's holding, not a spike that corrects. The limitation is honest. Waco's job market outside Baylor and the service economy is limited. And while downtown revitalization is genuine, the broader infrastructure is still catching up. If you're buying for location, lifestyle, or long-term appreciation, Waco still makes sense. If you need deep job market diversity, the next few cities on this list are going to be more relevant. San Antonio is the largest city on this list, and its story right now is one that confuses a lot of buyers, because the headline data and the ground-level reality are pointing in different directions. The headline, San Antonio was among the Texas metros that saw price corrections in 2025. That's accurate. Most people miss this part though. San Antonio recorded over 7,000 closed home sales in just the first quarter of 2025 alone. That level of transaction volume doesn't happen in a dead market. It happens when real people are making real decisions to move in large numbers. What's happening is a recalibration, not a collapse. Years of rapid appreciation created overpricing in certain segments. That's correcting. But the underlying demand, military installations, a growing healthcare sector, and costs still significantly below Austin, hasn't gone away. And that changes everything about how you should be reading this market. For buyers, that correction is the opportunity. A market that ran too hot and is settling back is exactly when you want to be looking. Not after it's already recovered. The risk is assuming all of San Antonio is the same story. It isn't. The North Side and Hill Country fringe are performing differently than the urban core. Where you buy inside the city matters more right now than the city-level data suggests. If you're serious about San Antonio, get specific. The broad numbers will mislead you. Fort Worth is where the Dallas comparison becomes the most useful thing you can look at right now. Dallas home values dropped nearly 4% in 2025. Fort Worth, sitting in the same metro, barely moved. Tarrant County held its median price essentially flat. That divergence doesn't happen by accident. Fort Worth has been quietly building a genuine economic identity separate from Dallas for years. Healthcare, manufacturing, aerospace, logistics. No single sector dominates. And that diversification is exactly what kept the market stable when Dallas started correcting. The typical home in Fort Worth sits around $300,000 to $320,000. For that price, you're buying into a city with a growing population, a solid job base, and a housing market that proved in 2025 it could hold when the rest of North Texas softened. The part that doesn't get talked about enough, stability in a housing market isn't a consolation prize. In a market where people are nervous about overpaying, a city that demonstrably holds its value is exactly the kind of floor you want under a purchase. This isn't the highest upside play on this list, but it may be the most defensible position in North Texas right now. And that matters more than most buyers currently think. Now, this is where things flip. The first half of this list was about affordability and early signals. The next 5 are where buyers are already getting in before prices move. The growth drivers are harder to ignore. The data is moving in one direction, and the windows are narrower than they look. Pay attention here, because this is where the real opportunity on this list lives. Now, this is where the opportunity really starts to show. Temple is what happens when a city sits in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, and most buyers still haven't noticed. Located about an hour north of Austin on I-35, Temple has been quietly absorbing buyers priced out of the Austin metro for years. The median home in Austin sits at $540,000. Temple comes in well below that, closer to the high $200,000 depending on the area. That gap is large enough to drive real relocation decisions, and it has been. The Baylor Scott and White health system is the economic anchor, making Temple one of the stronger healthcare employment hubs in all of Central Texas. That's job stability that doesn't depend on tech sector cycles. On paper, this looks almost too clean, but here's the reality check. Temple's economy beyond healthcare is still developing, and it won't fully substitute for the Austin experience if that's what you're after. But here's what makes Temple worth watching right now. The heat is early stage. Buyers are arriving, inventory is tightening, prices are starting to move. And this is happening fast. You're not looking at a market that's already run. You're looking at one that's just beginning to. That's the exact window you want to be in. And it's also the window that closes fastest once the broader market catches on. Conroe just ranked as the #1 fastest growing Houston suburb in the country, not in Texas, in the country. The 2025 U-Haul Growth Index put Conroe 20th nationally for net inbound moves. Since 2010, Conroe's population has more than doubled, from around 56,000 to nearly 120,000 today. In 2026, it ranked 15th in the entire country for the rate of millennial transplants arriving. That demographic doesn't move randomly. They move where the value proposition is undeniable. The median home price in Conroe sits around $283,000 to $296,000, roughly 30% below the national median. For Lake Conroe access, strong schools, suburban space, and 40 minutes to Houston, that pricing still represents real value. Most people miss this part. Buyers who see price moderation over the past year assume the growth story is over. It isn't. What moderated was speculative heat. What remained is structural demand. From Houston, commuters, remote workers, and young families, that the data shows is still accelerating. Buyers who are waiting for Conroe to get cheaper are probably going to be waiting a long time. And this is where things get serious. Denton is the city on this list where the future is most clearly visible, and most buyers still aren't pricing it in. In November 2025, construction broke ground on Landmark, a $10 billion, 3,200-acre master-planned community. Over 6,000 single-family homes, 3,000 multi-family units, a full commercial corridor. Now, this is the part nobody is paying attention to. A project of that scale doesn't get institutional backing unless the long-term demand case is airtight. And that changes everything about how you should be looking at Denton right now. The growth logic is straightforward. Denton sits at the convergence of I-35W and US 380, two corridors that have been feeding North Texas population growth for years, close enough to both Fort Worth and Dallas to benefit from both employment bases. The University of North Texas provides a permanent institutional presence that stabilizes demand independent of economic cycles. The typical home in Denton sits in the low to mid $300,000 range, meaningfully below what comparable DFW access costs closer to Dallas. The honest read, some of Denton's infrastructure is still catching up to the population it's absorbing. If you need everything already built out, Denton may feel like a work in progress right now. But for buyers with a 5 to 10 year horizon, Denton is one of the highest conviction plays in all of North Texas. You're not buying what Denton is today. You're buying what $10 billion in development turns it into. Abilene is the city on this list that most people are going to scroll past, and that's exactly why it's number 2. While the major Texas metros were correcting in 2025, Abilene went in the opposite direction. Home prices rose 5.3% year over year. The average days on market dropped from 70 days to 39. Homes that used to sit for 2 months are now moving in 5 weeks. Buyers are moving here fast, and most people still aren't paying attention. The median sale price sits around $250,000. The overall cost of living is 11% below the national average. The local economy is anchored by healthcare, education, and manufacturing. Stable sectors that don't evaporate when a tech cycle turns. And the Texas Realtors Association cited Abilene as having one of the largest increases in closed sales of any market in the entire state in 2025. On paper, this looks almost too good for the price, and here's why that's worth paying attention to. Abilene is geographically isolated. It's West Texas, not a suburb of anywhere. If your life requires proximity to a major metro, this isn't your city. That's a real limitation, and it eliminates a lot of buyers. But if you're a remote worker, a retiree, or a buyer who needs to maximize what their dollar actually buys, Abilene is one of the few markets in Texas where prices are still moving up, inventory is still accessible, and the cost of living gives you room to breathe. That combination doesn't stay quiet for long when a market starts moving this fast while the rest of the conversation is looking somewhere else. The window is already open. The question is whether you're paying attention before it closes. And this is where the list ends, because New Braunfels is the most complete housing story in Texas right now. Every variable that drives a housing market is pointing in the same direction at the same time. That doesn't happen often. Situated between San Antonio and Austin on I-35, New Braunfels doesn't need to choose which metro to benefit from. It gets both. And that location advantage isn't going anywhere. The median home value here has appreciated 6% over the past year, reaching around $345,000. That appreciation is happening while most comparable Texas cities are flat or declining. The 5-year appreciation rate is 33.8%. A home purchased here 5 years ago for $257,000 is now worth $345,000. With only 2.5 months of housing supply, New Braunfels is one of the few mid-sized Texas cities in a genuine seller's market right now. The part that doesn't get talked about enough, you are not getting a discount here. At $345,000 median, this market is priced at what it's worth. Buyers who come in expecting to negotiate hard are going to be disappointed. The sellers here know what they have. The question isn't whether New Braunfels is cheap. It isn't. The question is whether the trajectory continues, and the location, the inventory position, the population growth, and the consistent demand from 2 major metro spillovers all point the same direction. If you're serious about buying in Texas in the next 6 to 12 months, New Braunfels should be on your radar, whether your budget fits it today or not, because understanding where a market is heading tells you exactly where the markets around it are headed next. So here's what this list actually tells you. The Texas housing market is not one market. It never was. While Austin corrected and Dallas pulled back, cities like Abilene and New Braunfels moved in the opposite direction, while buyers waited for a statewide crash that didn't come. The markets with real structural demand kept tightening. If you need the lowest entry point right now, Killeen and Abilene are still the floors. If you want long-term growth with serious infrastructure behind it, Denton and Conroe have the data. If you want the complete package, appreciation, location, demand, and a market that demonstrably holds, New Braunfels is the most complete story on this list. But here's the most important thing to take from this video. If you're serious about buying in Texas in the next 6 to 12 months, these are the markets you need to be watching right now. Not after prices recover, not after the headlines catch up, now. Because by the time these cities show up in headlines, the opportunity is already gone. Which city surprised you most, or which one are you already looking at? Drop it in the comments below. And if you want deeper breakdowns on any of these markets individually, make sure you're subscribed, because that's exactly what this channel is building toward.